What is really emerging as
Introduction: The Missing Ink. In an old joke from the defunct German Democratic Republic, a German worker gets a job in Siberia. Aware of how all mail will be read by the censors, he tells his friends, "Let's establish a code. If a letter you get from me is written in ordinary blue ink, it's true. If it's written in red ink, it's false." After a month, his friends get the first letter, written in blue ink. Everything is wonderful here. The shops are full, food is abundant, apartments are large and properly heated, cinemas show films from the West, there are many beautiful girls ready for an affair. The only thing you can't get is red ink. The structure here is more refined than it might appear. Although the worker is unable to signal that what he is saying is a lie in the prearranged way, he nonetheless succeeds in getting his message across. How? By inscribing the very reference to the code into the encoded message as one of its elements. Of course, this is the standard problem of self-reference. Since the letter is written in blue, is its entire content therefore not true? The answer is that the very fact that the lack of red ink is mentioned signals that it should have been written in red ink. The nice point is that this mention of the lack of red ink produces the effect of truth independently of its own literal truth. Even if red ink really was available, the lie that it is unavailable is the only way to get the true message across in this specific condition of censorship. Is this not the matrix of an efficient critique of ideology, not only in totalitarian conditions of censorship, but perhaps even more in the more refined conditions of liberal censorship? One starts by agreeing that one has all the freedoms one wants, then one merely adds that the only thing missing is the red ink. We feel free because we lack the very language to articulate our unfreedom. What this lack of red ink means is that today, all the main terms we use to designate the present conflict, war on terrorism, democracy and freedom, human rights, and so on, are false terms, mystifying our perception of the situation instead of allowing us to think it. In this precise sense, our freedoms themselves serve to mask and sustain our deeper unfreedom. 100 years ago, in his emphasis on the acceptance of some fixed dogma as the condition of demanding actual freedom, Gilbert Keith Chesterton perspicuously detected the anti-democratic potential of the very principle of freedom of thought. We may say broadly that free thought is the best of all safeguards against freedom. Managed in a modern way, the emancipation of the slave's mind is the best way to prevent the emancipation of the slave. Teach him to worry about whether he wants to be free, and he will not free himself. Is this not emphatically true of our postmodern time, with its freedom to deconstruct, doubt, distantiate oneself? We should not forget that Chesterton makes exactly the same claim as Kant in his What is Enlightenment? Think as much as you like, and as freely as you like, just obey. The only difference is that Chesterton is more specific and spells out the implicit paradox beneath the Kantian reasoning. Not only does freedom of thought not undermine actual social servitude, it positively sustains it. The old motto, "Don't think, obey," to which Kant reacts, is counterproductive. It effectively breeds rebellion. The only way to secure social servitude is through freedom of thought. Chesterton is also logical enough to assert the obverse of Kant's motto. The struggle for freedom needs a reference to some unquestionable dogma. In a classic line from a Hollywood screwball comedy, the girl asks her boyfriend, "Do you want to marry me?" "No." "Stop dodging the issue. Give me a straight answer. In a way, the underlying logic is correct. The only acceptable straight answer for the girl is yes. So anything else, including a straight no, counts as evasion. This underlying logic, of course, is again that of the forced choice. You're free to decide on condition that you make the right choice. Would not a priest rely on the same paradox in a dispute with skeptical laymen? Do you believe in God? No! Stop dodging the issue. Give me a straight answer. Again, in the opinion of the priest, the only straight answer is to assert one's belief in God. Far from standing from a clear symmetrical stance, the atheist's denial of belief is an attempt to dodge the issue of the divine encounter. And is it not the same today with the choice of democracy or fundamentalism? Is it not that within the terms of this choice, it is simply not possible to choose fundamentalism? What is problematic in the way the ruling ideology imposes this choice on us is not fundamentalism, but rather democracy itself, as if the only alternative to fundamentalism is the political system of liberal parliamentary democracy.
Hey guys, this is Nick. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a comment below. We want to hear what your responses are. What do you think about what Zizek says? What is your understanding of the situation? And how do you see us moving forward?
Zizek actually wrote these essays in response to 9/11, so while that may seem a little bit dated in retrospect, I believe they're more relevant than ever. We've got more on the way. During the lockdown, we're trying to get a lot more content out to people. Otherwise, please re-watch this video. It wasn't until the 4th or 5th time going through it in editing that some of the implications really sunk into me. It's just a very dense text, and there are so many profound ideas in it. It's worth re-watching at least once or twice. Zizek is that good of a writer. Otherwise, we've hit over 300 subscribers, guys, so I cannot thank you guys enough. You're the best. If you enjoy our content and you think it's time, please subscribe. Otherwise, there's not much else to say, but we will see you in the circle.
What is really emerging as
Chapter 1. Passions of the Real, Passions of Semblance. When Brecht, on the way from his home to his theater in July 1953, passed the column of Soviet tanks rolling towards the Stalin Alley to crush the workers' rebellion, he waved at them, and wrote in his diary later that day that, at that moment, he, never a party member, was tempted for the first time in his life to join the Communist Party. It was not that Brecht tolerated the cruelty of the struggle in the hope that it would bring a prosperous future. The harshness of the violence as such was perceived and endorsed as a sign of authenticity. Is this not an exemplary case of what Alain Badiou has identified as the key feature of the 20th century, the passion for the real, the passion de réel? In contrast to the 19th century utopian or scientific projects and ideals, plans for the future, the 20th century aimed at delivering the thing itself, at directly realizing the longed-for new order. The ultimate and defining moment of the 20th century was the direct experience of the real, as opposed to everyday social reality. The real in its extreme violence as the price to be paid for peeling off the deceptive layers of reality. In the trenches of World War I, Ernst Jünger was already celebrating face-to-face combat as the authentic intersubjective encounter. Authenticity resides in the act of violent transgression from the Lacanian real, the thing Antigone confronts when she violates the order of the city, to the battalion excess. In the domain of sexuality itself, the icon of this passion for the real is Oshima's Empire of the Senses, a Japanese cult movie from the 1970s in which the couple's love relationship is radicalized into mutual torture until death. Is not the ultimate figure of the passion for the real the option we get on hardcore websites to observe the inside of a vagina from the vantage point of a tiny camera at the top of the penetrating dildo? At this extreme point, a shift occurs when we get too close to the desired object. erotic fascination turns into disgust at the real of the bare flesh. Footnote number 3. And, to add a personal note, when in the early 1990s I was more involved in Slovene politics, I experienced my own brush with the passion for the real. When I was considered for a government post, the only one which interested me was that of the Minister of the Interior, or head of the Secret Service. The notion of serving as Minister of Culture, Education, or Science seemed to me utterly ridiculous, not even worth serious consideration. Another version of the passion for the real, as opposed to the servicing of goods in social reality, is clearly discernible in the Cuban Revolution. Making virtue out of necessity, today's Cuba heroically continues to defy the capitalist logic of waste and planned obsolescence. Many of the products used there are, in the West, treated as waste.
Se pone en la corriente y con estos pequeños aditamentos es capaz de reanimar una batería de reloj no recargable.
Not only the proverbial 1950s American cars, which magically still function, but even dozens of Canadian yellow school buses, with old painted inscriptions in French or English, still completely legible, probably given as a present to Cuba and used there for public transport. Footnote number 4. This externality to capitalism is also discernible in the way Cuba continues to rely on the good old socialist stance of symbolic accountancy. In order to count properly, every event has to be inscribed into the big other. There was a note on a display panel in Havana Hotel in 2001. Dear guests, in order to fulfill the program of fumigation for this hotel, the hotel will be fumigated on February 9th from 3 p.m. till 9 p.m. Why this redoubling? Why not simply inform the guests that the hotel will be fumigated? Why should fumigation be covered by a program of fumigation? And, incidentally, I am tempted to ask if this is also how one proposes a sexual encounter in these conditions, not the usual process of seduction, but, my dear, in order to fulfill our sexual program, why don't we ... Thus, we have the paradox that, in the frantic era of global capitalism, the main result of the revolution is to bring social dynamics to a standstill, the price to be paid for exclusion from the global capitalist network. Here we encounter a strange symmetry between Cuba and Western post-industrial societies. In both cases, the frantic mobilization conceals a more fundamental immobility. In Cuba, revolutionary mobilization conceals social stasis. In the developed West, frantic social activity conceals the basic sameness of global capitalism, the absence of an event. Walter Benjamin defined the Messianic moment as that of Dialektik im Stillstand, dialectics at a standstill. In the expectation of a messianic event, life comes to a standstill. Do we not encounter in Cuba a strange realization of this, a kind of negative messianic time? The social standstill in which the end of time is near, and everybody is waiting for the miracle of what will happen when Castro dies and socialism collapses. No wonder that, besides political news and reports, the main item on Cuban TV is English language courses, an incredible number of them, 5 to 6 hours every day. Paradoxically, the very return to anti-messianic capitalist normality is experienced as the object of messianic expectation, something for which the country simply waits in a state of frozen animation. In Cuba, renunciations themselves are imposed as proof of the authenticity of the revolutionary event, what in psychoanalysis is called the logic of castration. The entire Cuban politico-ideological identity rests on the fidelity to castration. No wonder the leader is called Fidel Castro. The counterpart of the event is the growing inertia of social being, life. A country frozen in time, with old buildings in a state of decay.
It is not that the revolutionary event was betrayed by the Thermidorian establishment of a new order. The very insistence on the event led to the immobilization at the level of positive social being. The decaying houses are proof of fidelity to the event.
No wonder revolutionary iconography in today's Cuba is full of Christian references, apostles to the revolution, the elevation of Che into a Christ-like figure, the eternal one, Lo Eterno, the title of a song Carlos Puebla sings about him. When eternity intervenes in time, time comes to a standstill. No wonder that the basic impression of Havana in 2001 was that the original inhabitants had escaped and squatters had taken it over, out of place in these magnificent old buildings, occupying them temporarily, subdividing large spaces with wooden panels, and so on. Here, the image of Cuba we get from someone like Pedro Juan Gutierrez, his Dirty Havana trilogy, is revealing. The Cuban being, as opposed to the revolutionary event, the daily struggle for survival, the escape into violent promiscuous sex, seizing the day without future-oriented projects. This obscene inertia is the truth of the revolutionary sublime. Footnote number 5. The specificity of the Cuban Revolution is best expressed by the duality of Fidel and Che Guevara. Fidel, the actual leader, supreme authority of the state, versus Che, the eternal revolutionary rebel who could not resign himself to just running a state. Is this not something like a Soviet Union in which Trotsky would not have been rejected as the arch-traitor? Imagine that, in the mid-1920s, Trotsky had emigrated and renounced Soviet citizenship in order to incite permanent revolution around the world, and then died soon after. After his death, Stalin would have elevated him into a cult. Of course, such a fidelity to the cause, socialismo o muerte, insofar as this cause is embodied in the leader, can easily degenerate into the leader's readiness to sacrifice, not himself for the country, but the country itself for himself, for his cause. Similarly, the proof of true fidelity to a leader is not that one is ready to take a bullet for him. Over and above this, one must be ready to take a bullet from him, accept being dropped or even sacrificed by him if this serves his higher purposes. And is not so-called fundamentalist terror also an expression of the passion for the real? Back in the early 1970s, after the collapse of the New Left student protest movement in Germany, one of its outgrowths was the Red Army faction terrorism, the Baader-Meinhof gang, and so on. Its underlying premise was that the failure of the student movement had demonstrated that the masses were so deeply immersed in their apolitical consumerist stance that it was not possible to awaken them through standard political education and consciousness raising. A more violent intervention was needed to shake them out of their ideological numbness, their hypnotic consumerist state, and only direct violent interventions like bombing supermarkets would do the job. And does the same not hold on a different level for today's fundamentalist terror? Is not its goal also to awaken us, Western citizens, from our numbness, from immersion in our everyday ideological universe? These last two examples indicate a fundamental paradox of the passion for the real. It culminates in its apparent opposite, in a theatrical spectacle, from the Stalinist show trials to spectacular terrorist acts. Footnote number 6. On a more general level, we should note how Stalinism, with its brutal passion for the real, its readiness to sacrifice millions of lives for its goal, to treat people as dispensable, was at the same time the regime most sensitive about maintaining proper appearances. It reacted with total panic whenever there was a threat that these appearances would be disturbed. Say that some accident, which clearly revealed the failure of the regime, would be reported in the media. In the Soviet media, there were no black chronicles, no reports on crime and prostitution, let alone workers or public protests. If, then, the passion for the real ends up in the pure semblance of the spectacular effect of the real, then, in an exact inversion, the postmodern passion for the semblance ends up in a violent return to the passion for the real. Take the phenomenon of cutters, people, mostly women, who experience an irresistible urge to cut themselves with razors or otherwise hurt themselves. This is strictly parallel to the virtualization of our environment. It represents a desperate strategy to return to the real of the body. As such, cutting must be contrasted with normal tattooed inscriptions on the body, which guarantee the subject's inclusion in the virtual symbolic order. The problem with cutters is the opposite one, namely the assertion of reality itself. Far from being suicidal, far from indicating a desire for self-annihilation, cutting is a radical attempt to regain or gain a hold on reality. Or, another aspect of the same phenomenon, to ground the ego firmly in bodily reality, against the unbearable anxiety of perceiving oneself as non-existent. Cutters usually say that once they see the warm red blood flowing out of the self-inflicted wound, they feel alive again, firmly rooted in reality. So, although, of course, cutting is a pathological phenomenon, it is nonetheless a pathological attempt at regaining some kind of normality, at avoiding a total psychotic breakdown. On today's market, we find a whole series of products deprived of their malignant properties. Coffee without caffeine, cream without fat, beer without alcohol, and the list goes on. What about virtual sex as sex without sex? The Colin Powell doctrine of warfare with no casualties, on our side, of course, as warfare without warfare. The contemporary redefinition of politics as the art of expert administration, that is, as politics without politics. Up to today's tolerant liberal multiculturalism as an experience of the other deprived of its otherness. The idealized other who dances fascinating dances and has an ecologically sound holistic approach to reality, while practices like wife-beating remain out of sight. Virtual reality simply generalizes this procedure of offering a product deprived of its substance. It provides reality itself deprived of its substance, of the hard resistant kernel of the real. Just as decaffeinated coffee smells and tastes like real coffee without being real coffee, virtual reality is experienced as reality without being so. What happens at the end of this process of virtualization, however, is that we begin to experience real reality itself as a virtual entity. For the great majority of the public, the World Trade Center explosions were events on the TV screen, and when we watched the oft-repeated shot of frightened people running towards the camera ahead of the giant cloud of dust from the collapsing tower, was not the framing of the shot itself reminiscent of spectacular shots in catastrophe movies, a special effect which outdid all others, since, as Jeremy Bentham knew, reality is the best appearance of itself? And was not the attack on the World Trade Center with regard to Hollywood catastrophe movies like snuff pornography versus ordinary sadomasochistic porno movies? This is the element of truth in Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's provocative statement that the planes hitting the World Trade Center towers was the ultimate work of art. We can perceive the collapse of the World Trade Center towers as the climactic conclusion of 20th century art's passion for the real. The terrorists themselves did not do it primarily to provoke real material damage, but for the spectacular effect of it. When, days after September 11, 2001, our gaze was transfixed by the images of the plane hitting one of the World Trade Center towers, we were all forced to experience what the compulsion to repeat and jouissance beyond the pleasure principle are. We wanted to see it again and again. The same shots were repeated ad nauseum, and the uncanny satisfaction we got from it was jouissance at its purest. It was when we watched the two World Trade Center towers collapsing on the TV screen that it became possible to experience the falsity of reality TV shows. Even if these shows are for real, people still act in them. They simply play themselves. The standard disclaimer in a novel, characters in this text are fictional, any resemblance to real-life characters is purely accidental, also holds for participants in reality soaps. What we see there are fictional characters, even if they play themselves for real. The authentic 20th century passion for penetrating the real thing, ultimately the destructive void, through the cobweb of semblances which constitute our reality, thus culminates in the thrill of the real as the ultimate effect, sought after from digitalized special effects through reality TV and amateur pornography up to snuff movies. Snuff movies which deliver the real thing are perhaps the ultimate truth of virtual reality. There is an intimate connection between the virtualization of reality and the emergence of an infinite and infinitized bodily pain, much stronger than the usual one. Do not biogenetics and virtual reality combined open up new enhanced possibilities of torture? New and unheard of horizons of extending our ability to endure pain, through widening our sensory capacity to sustain pain, through inventing new forms of inflicting it. Perhaps the ultimate Sadian image of an undead victim of torture who can bear endless pain without having the escape into death at his or her disposal is also waiting to become reality. The ultimate American paranoid fantasy is that of an individual living in a small, idyllic Californian city, a consumerist paradise, who suddenly starts to suspect that the world he is living in is a fake, a spectacle staged to convince him that he is living in a real world, while all the people around him are in fact actors and extras in a gigantic show. The most recent example of this is Peter Weir's The Truman Show, 1998, with Jim Carrey playing the small-town clerk who gradually discovers the truth that he is the hero of a permanent 24-hour TV show. His hometown is in fact a gigantic studio set, with cameras following him everywhere. Among its predecessors, it is worth mentioning Philip K. Dick's Time Out of Joint, 1959, in which the hero, living a modest daily life in a small idyllic Californian city in the late 1950s, gradually discovers that the whole town is a fake, staged to keep him satisfied. The underlying experience of Time Out of Joint and of The Truman Show is that the late capitalist consumerist Californian paradise is, in its very hyper-reality, in a way, unreal, substanceless, deprived of material inertia. And the same derealization of the horror went on after the World Trade Center collapse. While the number of victims, 3,000, is repeated all the time, it is surprising how little of the actual carnage we see. No dismembered bodies, no blood, no desperate faces of dying people. In clear contrast to reporting on Third World Catastrophes, where the whole point is to produce a scoop of some gruesome detail, Somalis dying of hunger, raped Bosnian women, men with their throats cut. These shots are always accompanied by an advance warning that some of the images you will see are extremely graphic and may upset children. A warning which we never heard in the reports on the World Trade Center. Is this not yet further proof of how, even in this tragic moment, the distance which separates us from them, from their reality, is maintained? The real horror happens there, not here. Footnote number 8. Another case for ideological censorship. When firefighters' widows were interviewed on CNN, most of them gave the expected performance, tears, prayers, all except one, who, without a tear, said that she does not pray for her dead husband because she knows that prayer will not bring him back. Asked if she dreams of revenge, she calmly said that that would be a true betrayal of her husband. Had he survived, he would have insisted that the worst thing to do is to succumb to the urge to retaliate. There is no need to add that this clip was shown only once, then disappeared from the repetitions of the same interviews.
So it is not only that Hollywood stages a semblance of real life deprived of the weight and inertia of materiality. In late capitalist consumerist society, real social life itself somehow acquires the features of a staged fake, with our neighbors behaving in real life like stage actors and extras. Again, the ultimate truth of the capitalist utilitarian despiritualized universe is the dematerialization of real life, its reversal into a spectral show.
Among others, Christopher Isherwood gave expression to this unreality of American daily life, exemplified in the motel room. American motels are What up, gang? It's your boy Nick with the Unists. Thank you guys so much for watching. It took many weeks to get through this video, so I'm glad it's finally done. This is only the first part of the first chapter, so I hope you guys enjoy it. There is so much material, so please rewatch this at least once or twice so that you can really have it all sink in. The discussion is ongoing. Please join us in the Discord. The link is in the description. Otherwise, we've got a lot coming up. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Please leave them in the comments. We're going to be starting live streaming soon to go through industrial society and its future, as well as some of Zizek's work, a lot of other good stuff, so we'd love to have you in on that. Otherwise, there's not much else to say, but we will see you in the circle.